بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم.
In the name of God, the Beneficent, the Merciful,
الحمد لله رب العالمين. والصلاة
and
والسلام على
praise and
سيدنا ونبينا
salute
بالقاسم
to
المصطفى محمد
our Master Prophet Muhammad,
وآله
peace be upon him,
الطيبين
and his
الطاهرين
pure
المعصومين
household and progeny.
سيما بقية الله في الأراضين. امروز مراسم
Today,
بزرگداشت
we're marking the commemoration of the great late Imam in a different way
شکل معمول این
compared to
مراسم اجرا میشه.
the ordinary routine every year.
چگونگی برگزاری مراسم مهم نیست.
Now, it doesn't matter how the ceremonies are held.
اصل قضیه و
The
مهم
essence and what matters is
امام بزرگوار است.
mentioning the late Imams
که
and
ما امروز
remembering him
امروز کشورمون و فردای
today
کشورمون
in our country and also
به این احتیاج داریم.
tomorrow. That's what we need.
امام بزرگوار سالها پس
The great
از
Imam,
در گذشت ظاهری او و
After a passage of years, after his
در بین ما زنده
physical
است باید
disappearance, he still is among us. He
و ما از
lives on,
نور
and
او و
this should
معنویت
go
او
on. And his spirituality, his presence, his
و انگشت
thoughts,
اشاره او
and
بهره مند بشیم و استفاده
we
کنیم.
need to avail ourselves of his presence and thoughts
امروز بنده
and references. Well, today I'm going to
یک خصوصیت مهمی از
focus on
خصوصیات امام بزرگوار
a
بحث کنم.
major idiosyncrasy and characteristic of the
البته ایشون یک
late Imam.
انسان ذو
Of
ابعاد
course,
و
he
دارای
has
خصوصیات
multiple
برجسته متعددی بودند.
outstanding
این
characteristics.
خصوصیتی که امروز بحث می‌کنیم
What we are going to talk about today is among the
برجسته‌ترین
most significant and the most outstanding
و اون
idiosyncrasies of
عبارت است
the
از
great Imam,
روحیه
and that being the
تحول
spirit
خواهی
of asking for
و
change
تحول انگیزی
and also
جامعه
causing change.
امام هم روحاً یک انسان
Well,
تحول
spiritually, the
خواه
Imam
بود، هم تحول
was
آفرین.
calling for change, and he was the one who was responsible for change.
مورد ایجاد تحول
Now, as for
نقش
creating change,
صرفاً
his
نقش
role
یک
was not
معلم و
merely
استاد
that of a
و مدرس نبود.
mentor
نقش یک
or
فرمانده
an instructor or coach. He acted as a
داخل در
commander.
عملیات
He was involved in the operation, and he was a true leader par excellence.
ایشون بزرگترین تحولات
Well,
رو
the greatest
در دوران
developments
خودشون در زمان
and
خودشون
changes, he was the one who created all those
حوزه‌های متعددی
on various numerous fronts, a variety of fields,
اشاره میکنم.
a number of which I will make a mention of today.
روحیه
Well, in the first place, this spirit of asking for change,
در این بزرگوار وجود داشته
it existed in the late Imam since long ago. That was not something that has started to be at the beginning of the Islamic movement in the Iranian calendar year 1341. Since his youth,
ایشون یک انسان تحول خواه بودن.
he was the one who was asking for change, and the signs of it
از همون
was
یادداشتی
actually the
نوشته‌ای
note
که ایشون
that
در دوران
he had
جوانی
written
تقریباً
during his
در دهه
youth,
سی از
in the
عمرشون
when he was in his 30s. That's what he had, the note he written in
عین اون نوشته رو در خط
late Vaziri Yazdi, and
وزیری به من نشون داد.
the late Vaziri showed me
بعد هم چاپ
his
شده در
notes,
بسیاری
and later on it was also published, and many people had the chance to see that. That there, on that note, there was this holy verse of the Holy Quran. He invites everyone, the public, to rise for the cause of God. This is the kind of spirit that he enjoyed. So this is what he did, and he caused change. Like I mentioned, he just took to the stage. He just did not suffice to simply make orders, or simply talk about it. He took action. He caused changes, mental changes among a number of young theology students in the city of Rome. I will explain about that. And all the way to causing changes and developments, a wide scale one, among the general public in Iran. Well, the one related to Rome was the lesson he was teaching, morals. For tens of years before the Islamic uprising in the city of Rome, apart from Islamic jurisprudence and principles, he also had some sessions on morals and virtues. When we went to the city of Rome, that lesson was not being taught anymore for years, and it was coded by people who had been there in those classes. Once a week, the Imam had a meeting in Fayzi Seminary School, and the young theology students were gathering there. When he was speaking there, he just revolutionized the atmosphere and the hearts, their souls were highly affected, and we had also experienced that in the Islamic jurisprudence, in his teachings and instructions. On certain occasions, he would talk about moral values, and then the clerics would simply start shedding tears. That's how he was effective. That's how he could affect people, and he could revolutionize people's spirits. This is the very modus operandi of the divine prophets. At the beginning of all the moves by the prophets, they started by spiritually revolutionizing the people. That's why the Imam Ali says, that's the very same thing that the first Shia Imam says. In Arabic it was mentioned, and now the meaning, that means the very, that's the latent instinct in the human being that was awakened, and they pushed it to move, and they led that feeling toward taking action. That's how the Imam started. Of course, I cannot assert firmly that he held those sessions in order to somehow later on for them to culminate in a huge political uprising. But what's for sure is that this causing people to move and also instigating human instinct by those sessions on the morals, by preparing hearts and souls. That's how the Imam acted. So that's how he initiated. He started to bring change, and then it got expanded to bring change at the extensive level of the general public. And I'll mention a number of instances during the days of struggle and uprising, and also in the days after the victory of the Islamic Revolution. He created big change in the Iranian people, big time, and those who were addressed by this was the Iranian public. Now, before the Imam's movement, there were some political movements. For tens of years, there were various groups who were doing that, but their realm of activities were confined to a number of university students, maybe groups of 100, 150 university students, that they were able to, get engaged in certain groups. But what the Imam did was not a limited group, of certain stratum. It was the entire Iranian people. It's just like when we talk about people, it means an ocean. You know, it's like a causing a storm in an ocean. You know, it's not everyone is able to do that. You know, when you have a little swimming pool, you can create waves in that little pool, but creating those large waves in an ocean, that's a Herculean task, and that's what the Imam did. And he created certain changes. Now, one of those developments or changes was the change in this feeling of surrender among the Iranian people. When we were young, when we remember the movement started, the Iranian people were sort of people who, when it came to fundamental issues that had to do with their fate and destiny, they had nothing to do with that. You know, people just gave up. You know, they were passive. They were doing about their own, running around their own business, but asking and demanding, making demands, and actually making demands of great and important things. That's what did not exist in the behavior and attitude of our people, and that's what the Imam created among them. So the very same people who were passive and who had just given up and took no action, that nation was turned by the Imam to a nation that made demands. You know, remember those fiery speeches made by the late Imam and those emotional speeches by the Imam. It just shook the people, and the people turned into the people that had big demands. We have the 15th of Khordad incident, for instance. We have also instances what happened during the year 1341. That's 1962. That's when the struggle, the uprising started. And then lots of instances elsewhere, and then it ended up in the 15th of Khordad. And with that big slaughter and bloodshed could not put an end to the uprising of the people. And that went on up until the end of the people's fight against the regime. That's the big change that Imam created. So another change that he created was a change in the people's outlook, the way they looked upon themselves and their own society. The Iranian people looked upon themselves in a humiliating way. They considered themselves as some humble creatures. Well, to be able to overcome the will and the whims and wishes of the superpowers, they could never fancy the thought of that. It was not only the running actually the will of the superpowers, even the will and whims and wishes of the internal powers, or maybe a certain, let's say, official of a security, for example, organization or disciplinary force. People could never thought of being able to overcome the will and intentions of those who possessed hazardous whims and wishes. They always felt weak, but the Imam changed that to a feeling of dignity, to a feeling of self-confidence. And the fact that the people considered the despotic and dictatorial regime as something natural, and that's how it was. And well, at that time, we thought that, well, there's a person at the top, and he's at the helm, and he'll do whatever he wishes to do. And we found this to be something natural, something ordinary. So he changed the people from this mood to people who themselves decided the type of the government. So one of the slogans during the revolution was Islamic establishment, Islamic governance, and then the Islamic Republic. This was the slogan of the people. People themselves determined, they made demands. And then later on in different elections, they picked the person. I mean, people who had responsibilities and functions in different parts of the establishment, the people decided and chose the person to lead them. So that feeling of humiliation that was prevalent among the people, it automatically changed into self-esteem and self-confidence and dignity. Another change that was created was among the basic demands of the people. I mean, the people's demand, let's say, yeah, you can imagine a group of people had a demand of the regime at that time. It could be, for example, they want an asphalt road somewhere else, or they wanted some roads somewhere. That was the level of the demands that they had. And that was turned into a demand for independence, for freedom. That means, you know, the slogan of neither East nor West. These were the demands of the people that were highly revolutionizing. And from little mean things that was confined to certain locales, and they turned to some fundamental and huge issues that were all-encompassing. Another change that the Imam created was a change in the way people looked upon the faith. Faith and religion for people was something personal, you know, some maybe worship. It was something purely personal. And they would say their prayers, they would fast, some financial obligations, marriage, divorce, and that was all. That was it. So this is how the people looked upon religion, and so the mission of the religion, that was how people considered that, at a very limited level. So the Imam created this, he said, he defined this civilization, creation of civilization, and he changed the people's outlook regarding the religion. That was a totally different perspective. Creating and building of society, building of communities, and human beings. Now, another change was a look to the future. Now, the time when the uprising started and the Imam entered the scene, you know, there were all slogans by a number of groups and parties and grouplets. They were very limited in numbers. Now, in the eyes of the people, you couldn't see any future. I mean, people did not have a clear prospect before their eyes. So that turned into creating a novel Islamic civilization. That means today, when you look at the Iranian people, that's the Imam's the contribution to this that has created this. The people want the novel Islamic civilization to be created. They want the huge Islamic unity, the Islamic Ummah or community. That's what they want to form. So that's what the majority of the public look at the issue of religion. Now, in a more specialized field, also change in Gnostic principles that could be applied. That's what the Imam created. This is among the specialized fields that are discussed among the, you know, seminaries, schools, and religious jurisprudence. So religious jurisprudence was what the Imam incorporated into creating and establishing establishments. You know, with the Islamic jurisprudence for thousands of years, the clerics were talking about it and they were mentioning it, but because they had no hope for that Islamic jurisprudence establishment to be established, they would never go into details. But the late Imam incorporated that into the major issues of seminary schools, and Najaf Seminary School, he raised the issue and he started discussing about it. A really robust and well-founded scientific and philosophical discussions that he put forth for all those thinkers, and also the contingencies of the establishment. That means the national interest. It's nothing apart from that. That issue also was what the Imam raised in the Islamic jurisprudence. Well, there were certain issues that were being used, and personal issues that he incorporated them into the realm, the general realm. And in the running of the affairs of the country, the contingencies of the establishment and what's important and what's more prior, what has higher priority. That's what the Imam actually incorporated into the Islamic teachings. And that's what seminary schools need to favor this. You know, it opens the hand of the Islamic jurisprudence into different involvement that it could have on various fronts. Of course, what the Imam did regarding the jurisprudence was based on law, and as the Imam said, it's Jawahiri. The jurisprudence is not an innovation. It's the right use of the jurisprudential principles. So another instance was the way you look at the religious issues. It was insistence on worshiping. At the same time, when you have a novel look at the issues, I mean, the Imam was an innovator. The way he looked at things, he had a different eye. And at the same time, he was sticking to worship and prayers. You know, in those days, there were clerics who they were discussing in different, issues, and they were clerics and scholars. They were experts in religious affairs, but they were kind of affected by some circumstances. So regarding prayers and worship issues, maybe they were not that committed that they had to be. Not personally, I'm not talking about them. Personally, they were committed. In their promotional speeches, they were not stressing that much on prayers and worship. But the Imam, at the same time that he was offering this novel perspective regarding Islamic jurisprudence and teachings and principles and precepts, he also insisted on worship and prayers, both in the principles and precepts, also rituals and festivities. He highly insisted on morning processions and ceremonies. They all indicate the fact how strongly he was sticking to worship-related issues. Another domain that he caused change in was a change in the way you look upon the young generation, your perspective of the youth. Well, he trusted the way that the youth thought, the way they acted. That was a big change, par excellence. Let's say, for instance, the Islamic Revolution Guards Corps that was created. There were people in their 20s, so and they accepted them to act, to lead the IRGC. Maybe they were only 30 years old, but they led and they commanded the whole IRGC force. There were commanders, there were commanders-in-chief. They were all from among the youth, and they were assigned great tasks and missions. In other areas, that was the same thing, in judiciary, judicial areas, and other domains. He had high trust in the youth that he confided in, and he trusted them, and he trusted their actions and thoughts. At the same time, when there were non-use capacities, of course, he never negated that. I mean, when we're talking about youth and giving them further opportunities, some might think that that would mean that you should do away with the elderly. No, that's not the case. The Imam never did so. He never thought so. I mean, he had his trust in the youth as an asset for the establishment, and also non-youth, he had the same amount of trust in them. I mean, let's say, for instance, at a time when, at that time, I was not so old, but he appointed me as the Friday prayer leader of Tehran. At the same time, Martyr Ashrafi was 80 years old, for instance. Then he was also appointed as Friday prayer leader of Kermanshah, or the late Escape, or the late some other martyrs, those who achieved martyrdom while praying. They were appointed by the Imam. They were people at the ages between 60 and 70. So among the armed forces too. In the IRGC, for example, there were youths in the army. We had Martyr Fallahi, or let's say Zahir Najat. They were the people who were 60 years old or even older, and the Imam made use of their services. So when he said that you should rely on youths, it didn't mean that you should forget about the elderly. Or in the Imam Khomeini Relief Committee, late Askarulati, he was not young at that time, but he was appointed to that post. So when you say that the Imam had his trust in the youth, and then we are of the same belief that we need to trust the youth, and we need to take the best advantage of the youth and the development of the country. I will talk about that later. That means it's an asset for this country, and we should utilize this asset. It doesn't mean if the more experienced, the more seasoned people who are not young, they are also assets on their own. We should also make use of their services. Therefore, another important change that was created by the Imam, maybe that outweighed some of these changes that I mentioned, that being the change in the way you can look upon the world powers. At that time, nobody could fancy the thought of actually saying something and standing up against the U.S. will or words, or to be able to take any action in the opposite direction. The Imam did what the presidents of the U.S. themselves admitted, that Khomeini humiliated us, and that's what exactly happened. I mean, the Imam and also his agents and the youth that would simply move on at the orders of the Imam. They really humiliated world powers, and they shattered their will, and they kicked them out of the stage. And the Imam proved that superpowers are vulnerable. They could be defeated, and you saw it in the future. You saw the fate of the former Soviet Union, you saw what happened, and also in America today, you see what's going on in the U.S. You are witness to this. They could never imagine anything like that to happen. The Imam at that time, he sued us in the hearts of the people that they can be also defeated. They are vulnerable. So all these developments and changes were caused by the Imam, and he was the Imam of change par excellence. But he always considered this, he always attributed this to God. He said God was behind all of this. So this spiritual change that the Imam created among the youth, he repeatedly said in his speeches and comments that are published in a book, you could see time and again that the Imam refers to this upheaval in terms of, spiritual upheaval among the youth, and he feels surprised. I mean, the Imam himself caused this. It was he himself behind this, but he always referred us to God, and really, it's everything actually happens because on the back of God's will. So, and the Imam was really believing in the fact that it was very important for him to see those changes among the youth, and he was also very surprised to see that. And once he said that the change that he sees among the youth, this is even more important than overcoming the previous regime, because at that time you were overcoming a despot, but the change that you can see among the hearts of the youth, that means you overcome and you defeat Satan, that's higher and stronger than that despotic regime. That's how the Imam looked upon this change in the hearts of the youth and their outlook. So the Khomeini was the Imam of change. When we're mentioning these issues, we just don't mean that, let's say, we just want to get some more information about Imam's personality. Of course, that's also important on its own, but this is for us to learn lessons. We need to learn from the Imam. Any living and dynamic society needs change. Well, today we need change on various fronts. Of course, I should also say that following the departure of the Imam, the revolution, and the country did not distance itself from that change, the course of change. The people of Iran have been able to continue on that path in various fields. We have really caused changes, and we've become more powerful than previously, and at times we're even better off compared to the past, like these scientific and technological changes that you could see. That's something important. On those days, we were in a situation that was not really comparable to where we are today. Today we are being mentioned as people who are doing scientific work, or in terms of defensive capabilities. Today, we have our defensive capabilities are in fact close to a deterrent level, and that's really matters that the country has been able to achieve. On the political front, you have this strong image that the Islamic Republic of Iran is posing of itself across the world and the region. These are all the changes and developments that have happened, and they're eye-catching. In the past 30 years, the country has been moving. The changes that the Imam has caused, they never stopped. It's just made a headway and went forward. In some areas, we have had some infrastructure of change, but they're at a potential level now. They do exist, but they're not sufficient. What I'm talking about is that in certain areas, we didn't undergo change in some important areas. And in some areas, we even faced retrogression, and that's a source of regret. And that's unpleasant, and we cannot accept that. That's in contravention of the revolution. But for the revolution to survive, and it requires innovation, it requires progress, it needs change. Well, by change, we mean to achieve a better state or mood in a tangible way. That means a leap, that means a big headway. In different areas we needed this, in some areas we have not been able to do that. Now, in contrast, we have, revolutions, lots of revolutions in the world that sometimes face retrogression. I mean, after 5, 10, 15 years when the revolution starts, and then because of negligence, they had to go back, and they faced retrogression in that sense. So we have progression and retrogression. They both depend on human beings. If they move on the right path, if they act correctly, they will move forward. If they make mistakes, they will go back, and they will be reactionary. And the Quran also refers to this. Chapter of Rad, God says that no change will go to any nation unless they want it. Unless you make positive changes in yourselves, will God also put forth some positive issues before you. Also in Anfal chapter, God Almighty also says almost the same concept. That means this is a negative aspect of it, of course. That means when you move backward. If God bestows you a blessing and that people do not move the right way, then God will take that blessing away from them, will ignore them about that blessing. Also in the Kumail prayer, you have the same thing. That this change in the blessing means that God deprives you of that blessing, and that's because That's in the back of your resolution, and will. So we need to have been very carefully cautious, and we need to be careful not to face that. So the concept has been there within the establishment, but after the departure of the late Imam, we thought it was not sufficient, so the amount that it used to be. So for different reasons, we're able to, in different areas, as far as the civilization is concerned, we are able to create changes. But there are a number of, points there. I mean, my expectation of myself, my expectation of the youth and our elite, I expect them to think of bringing change in different areas that we require. Now, those areas, what they are, that's a different issue that we need to discuss. I'll just make a quick mention of that. So there are certain, points that you need to bear in mind if you want to really bring about change in the true sense of the word. If you want to see that happen, you need to take heed of those points. And one of those points being that when you're asking for change, necessarily it doesn't mean making a protest. It means that you constantly want, you are inclined to change. That means you never suffice to what you have in your position presently. So this is how it could initiate. Sometimes it could arise from an objection to the status quo, but it's not always like that. In many instances, change would mean that whatever we have, we do not find that to be sufficient. We want to go a step further, want to go a level higher. Well, it's not necessary to feel defeat to be able to make change. Sometimes you don't feel that you are defeated, you don't feel any failure, but what I'm going to draw a conclusion is that when we have created positive change, let's say, for instance, the issue of science or knowledge, we shouldn't say that, well, we have created change, so we don't need any more. That's not true. What we have, we should not find it to be sufficient. What we have in our possession is not sufficient. We need to ask for more. We need to bring more changes. We should find that necessary, and we should follow it, even in the areas where the changes have already been made, or in some various other areas where changes have happened. Therefore, by change, we mean that you have this inclination and willingness to accelerate, to move forward fast, and also to have this speedy movement, and also make leaps, and refraining from retrogression and going back, and also wrong understanding, insisting on that, avoiding that. This is what change means. And when there is no objection in certain areas, this is also true in that case. So that's one point. The second one being the right to an accurate change requires support, intellectual supports. That means any let's say, a move without any thinking behind it could not be considered change. Sometimes there's some lighthearted and superficial changes. You cannot call them change. I mean, change, let's say today we need to, in terms of justice, for instance, justice, something that we need to create change is the issue of justice, for instance. We need justice to undergo change. Well, this needs to be on the basis of some intellectual, some thoughts. So we should have this, what do we have on our mind regarding justice? On that basis, we should move toward change. That means we should have this intellectual and thought-based foundation behind it. That's among our spiritual assets. Among our spiritual assets we need to take advantage of, and that's the Islamic precepts, Islamic principles, and the Quranic verses, and the quotations of the Prophet's household. We need to make use of those, and on those bases we can create change. And whatever the late Imam did, and all the changes that he caused, were all relying on this Islamic change and the Gnostic and jurisprudential principles. Within that framework, the Imam moved forward and took action. If you do not have such an intellectual support and backing, then the change that you seek could be wrong. You may take missteps, and later on, you would not insist on that. I mean, you would not persevere in those changes. I mean, it reminds you of some individuals that we had some people in our own revolution. They were revolutionary people, they were interested in revolution, but they did not act on the robust religious values. They were not so firmly believing in religious and thought-based and ideological and reason-based values and pillars. So after a while, maybe since they were young, I mean, when they got a bit older, they turned into fossils that the revolution was totally against. I mean, the Islamic Revolution, in fact, there were a number of fossils that were going awry, and the revolution pushed them aside. A number of revolutionary youths of yesterday, when they got a bit older, and they went through their youth ages, so some of them turned into, some of them got close to those fossils I just mentioned. As Amir Firuzkohi, the late Amir Firuzkohi mentions in some poetry, it says that during youth we're trying to say knowledge, but in elderly, things got where I face things and experiences in a reverse way. Now, what is really important is that you should not mistake change with changes in your thoughts. During the Pahlavi era and before that a little bit, and also during the Pahlavi regime, we had something that called for asking a change. They were calling this a big development. That was not true. That was actually trying to change the Iranian people. It was not a renaissance. It was not modernity, as they put it. I mean, the Iranian people, their religious value, their national identity, their historical, age-old historical identity of the Iranian people, they just lost this during what they call modernity, during the Pahlavi regime, the Reza Khan, and then also we had some people who were affected by, mesmerized by the West during the Reza Khan, and they led him, they helped him, they tried to justify his actions. So the people of Iran were actually both the king, that was Reza Khan at that time, and some other so-called enlightened people and scholars. They just let go of their real and true identity, and this is a big upheaval. It's not change. Change should be directed forward and not backward. That's what happens. So when they lose their identity, when they lose their spiritual assets and positions, then this is a death and demise for their civilizations, civilizational demise. That's what, unfortunately, our country also went through at that time. I mean, they acted in such a way in different religious, academic and discourses. On the Western, for instance, science would be axiomatic. I mean, they would say that, for example, the Western scientist has made a quotation, so that's it. That's the basis, and we should act accordingly. That means you should just close down and shut down all the ways of thinking on your own. When you simply imitate others and accept what they say, and you never dare, let's say, think about something, or maybe resist against what the statements of a Western scholar, that means that you should do away with things, you should do away with jurisprudence, and you should just start imitating and following others. And that's in contravention with what the Prophet said. That means the treasures of thought and intellect, they need, this is what prophets tried to revive, and they wanted to bring to the fore. That's exactly the opposite way. Another point is that change does not necessarily, sometimes it doesn't happen instantly. It happens in the course of time and gradually. If you do you're moving in the right direction, if your target is right, and it means if you're moving, really moving in the real sense of the word. So if you reach your target, which is change, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you should tread on the right path, you should make a move, and you should not be impatient. I mean, if you imagine that you definitely should promptly do something, it should happen there and then, that's not true. So this seeking modernity that those puppet regimes brought us, the problem with that was that there was no one to show us the right way. That's one big deficiency. So in this gradual move, change that happens in the course of time, we need someone, we need to be kind of to show us, to guide us, to show us the way. And that we need those people to be trustworthy, who would guide and lead these the courses of action and change, or else the same thing will happen that we faced in the past. And another point is that change, there are a number of, you cannot mistake it for with some mundane things. When you hastily take some action, well, that doesn't mean change. A lot of times, in order to maybe suppress their, some feelings, they're itching to do something, and they just simply want to quench their thirst for that. That is not so valuable. Well, by change, we mean something fundamental, something basic that needs to happen. Speed, of course, does matter, but it's different from acting hastily. So these are a number of points that I just wanted to mention regarding the change that we need to follow, that the people of Iran, our youth, need to follow that kind of change. These are the points that we need to bear in mind. Now, by change in what areas? Well, like I said, this is a long, different discussion that we should determine in which areas we have some deficiencies and we need to bring about some change. But I can give you simply a list and some outlines, a number of outlines. We can make a mention of, for instance, in terms of economy, the change means that we would be able to actually cut dependence on oil. That means non-oil economy needs to be created. That's a big change. It's change par excellence. I mean, let's say, for instance, when it comes to budgeting, and funding, the executive and the legislative, they should work on the budgets and funding in such a way that it would really deal with performance and the subject. I mean, it should be an operational budget. Of course, they claim, governments mostly claim that their budgets are operational, but they're not, truly. So the budget of the country, if it's accurately and properly funded, then it would be a change in economic issues. Or let's say in some other issues, let's say, for instance, education, educational issues, we really need changes. Now, change in educational sphere, it means that our academic education, our high school education, even elementary school level education, when they need to be profound, they need to be applicable. We don't need to memorize things only. they should be, we should be able to take some practical advantage of them. Some lessons and subjects in our schools or universities, they're being taught, but for the students, they're good for nothing. I mean, they would never use them in any way in their whole life. And they will not be specialized in that area, and the information they would get would not be so practical. So they simply learn maybe some general information that they learn, and there's no use. It just wastes their time. So in terms of education, if we want to bring about change, it needs we need real change. That means the lesson, the subject must help us to do something. It must be applicable. It could be applied somewhere. So this development plan that we are having for this Ministry of Education, hopefully if that is implemented, we could see some change. Social issues is another point. Also justice and also resolution of certain issues like addiction, drug addiction. These are social dilemmas. We need to tackle them. Or family problems, for instance. We really need to cause change in that area. We hear reports that our country is moving, is getting old quickly, and this is horrible news. It's bad news. It's among the issues, the consequences of which emerge at a time when you will find no cure. It'll be too late to do anything. So change is needed also in that area. So there's also another important condition to cause change, and that is not being scared of animosity in the enemy. The Almighty God tells His prophet that not to be afraid of the people, not to be afraid of what people say. I mean, whatever positive, whatever important action could be opposed by a certain number of people. Opponents are there always. So when you have cyberspace, the kind of opposition, also the type, the nature of the opposition, they're usually harsh and they're troubling in nature. If you have this right and robust and well-calculated move that you make, you need to close your eyes and ears. I mean, you should also forget about the enemy, the external enemy. If you have a large number of enemies, and whatever move that you make in your country moving toward perfection or development, if there is this huge front that they're always thinking and trying to see what kind of blows to deal, both in terms of hardware and software. Well, by software, this is how they act. The important decisions, the logical decisions that are adopted in the country, they start questioning them. Through the extensive propaganda, the propaganda empire that they are using, the Zionists are using, they try to target those. We shouldn't be afraid of these. We need to move on. So in my opinion, how to do that is that we need the young to be present there. I mean, the one who doesn't care and simply moves on, regardless of the circumstances, is actually youth. It doesn't mean, of course, that we should do away with the non-young manpower. It means that we should make use of the thoughts and the spirit of the youngsters and their courage, and they're willing to change and make a move. We need to make use of this. Well, luckily, when our country relies on God, that's the result that you read. You see the enemies of ours. One of the enemies at that time was the Soviet Union, and you saw what the fate was. And now we now have the U.S., and you see what the situation is like in the United States and all the chaos there. What you see in American cities and states today, this is some facts and realities that were all swept under the rug. That's nothing new. They always existed, and they just emerged, which is like the mud, the base that is just coming to the surface. When you see, a police officer very easily kneels down and pressures the neck of a black man, and he just keeps pressuring and waits for him to die. The man is beseeching, begging him to stop, and he's simply there, at cold blood. And there are a number of other police officers just watching him do this and taking no action. I mean, this is nothing which has happened just recently. This is in their nature. This is what Americans have always done to the whole world, with Afghanistan to Iraq, Syria, many other countries. They used to do the same thing in Vietnam. This is how they are. This is in their nature. So today, they're just appearing this way. And people witness it. When people have in their slogans, they say, "Let us breathe," or "We can't breathe." This is now the slogan of the American people on the streets in different states, and protests, huge protest rallies in different cities. Well, that in fact is what all the world peoples say, where anywhere America entered, stepped in, and took some action against those people. It's a reflection of their voices. So, hopefully, with the blessing of God, the Americans faced the scandal. The way they acted, that's how they managed the coronavirus, and this scandal is still going on. The way they mishandled it, I mean, they started suffering, and they got targeted by the COVID-19 much later than others. They could have used other people's experiences, but they could have made better preparations. But because of mismanagement in that country, you see that they have a large number of fatalities and infections, much higher than other countries, and they have not been able to manage it, and they won't be able to manage it. And it's because of these characteristics, this corruption that is entrenched in the U.S. ruling clique. And this is how they are running the people, and this is how they are treating the people. And they kill the people They commit crimes. You can see heinous and open crimes. That's how they act. They don't apologize for that. At the same time, they talk about human rights. When that black man who lost his life, he was not a human being. He had no rights. So that's how things are in the U.S. So the people of America, in my opinion, once I just said, and I'm repeating that the people of America, they feel embarrassed, they feel humiliated, because of their governments and their establishment. This is the administration, the people of America. We understand they should feel humiliated by their administration now. I mean, Iranians in our country, or Iranian expatriates, their job is defending. Some of them, have always been defending the U.S. It looks like that they cannot again hold up their head high, given what has happened to the U.S. Hopefully, the Almighty God will make what's happened in the world in the interests of the Muslims, and also the pure soul of the late Imam Khomeini and the endeared martyrs and the recent martyr Soleimani. Hopefully, they could get together with his prophets. That's the end of the speech.